How's it going, guys? In this stream, I am going to give you the keys, or at least point you in the direction of the attainment of personal freedom and sovereignty. And this is also a pathway that could lead to the liberation of mankind in macro. And I know that sounds all a bit dramatic, but it's actually true that the key to all of this is basically our signal gating system and the default mode network. And I've talked about this a lot in recent streams, but basically what it comes down to is that we had this filtration system in our nervous system that helped us to manage the bandwidth of perceptibles so that it's manageable, so that we're not overwhelmed, so that we're not picking up the thoughts of other people and perceiving, UV and hearing infrasound and all of these kind of things that would not contribute to or would actually interfere with practical tasks like hunting and pretty much anything that you can think of. And so the way this ties into esoteric tradition is that if you look at the neuroscience on this, everything from shamanic use of, trying to watch my terminology here, altered states that are catalyzed by certain plants, breath work, meditation, whatever it is, the objective of all of these things is to mitigate the signal gating in our nervous system. And as it turns out, if you understand how all of these things work and you are in a position of power and authority, you can exploit all of these mechanisms to exert control over a population, to basically create an ontological narrative for them. And beyond that, in the information age, corporations, social media companies in particular, have also figured out how to exploit these things. And they are, it seems, working with the propaganda machine to integrate the political objectives and the ontological narrative molding with their own corporate bottom line objectives, right? So understanding the neuroscience, the cognitive science, the psychology, and the techniques for managing and mitigating this signal gating is absolutely essential if we want to have our own sovereignty, reclaim our own agency, right? When it comes to that particular task, we have quite a lot working against us. The subconscious is controlling the overwhelming majority of our behavior. And then we have the signal gating, right? And the signal gating is a tremendously difficult problem because we don't have any conscious interface with this process, right? We do have some influence on it. So there is an aspect of, like, if you will to reduce the mechanisms, that will actually happen to a degree. So just setting an intention is, something. But we have blind spots to a lot of it because we don't know that it's happening, right? So I've explained a lot of this in recent streams, so I'm not going to get super in-depth tonight. Also, I think we're probably limited on time because I got a notification from the government saying that there's going to be really bad electrical storms. So we may get cut off again. But yeah, a lot of this happens before these signals reach any part of our brain. And even if they do, our nervous system, again, has the ability to manipulate how we interpret those signals. So there's all kinds of noise and distortions that are occurring, ironically, in the system that is supposed to minimize noise and distortion. That's what it's really actually for. But nature has this recursive generative mechanism, right, that occurs at every level from Calabi-Yau manifolds to Fibonacci to mirror neurons, and so that is what our generative models use, just like everything else in nature, to create, or that's what our nervous system uses to create the generative models, right? So once we have established some kind of foundational belief, we are basically filtering out everything that is inconsistent with it, right? And there are other elements that sort of amplify the signal gating, right? So if a population is in fear and they're stressed out and they're constantly being told war is about to pop off everywhere, and it probably is with this Venezuelan thing, which, by the way, is way worse than a lot of people seem to realize. But we're not going to talk about that tonight. This sort of fear and dissonance actually causes our signal mitigation software to go into overdrive and to really start to double down on the reinforcement of the whatever ontological model it has been creating through this sort of recursive mechanism. So let me pull my notes up, because this is really an immense subject. And like I said, I'm not going to go into a tremendous amount of detail about the thalamus's role and the default mode network and all of these kind of technicals of neuroscience. You can find a lot of that on my Substack, and we will do individual live streams on a lot of these topics in the near future, because this is really what this channel has always been about. It was Aldous Huxley in 1954, I think, that first referred to this reducing valve in our nervous system. And this really kind of shines a light on one of the main reasons that this is so important, right? One of the sort of pretexts, I guess, for all of this is that one of the consequences of reducing this filtration system is that we have access to non-local information, and that we gain greater pattern recognition, and that our ability to extract details and engage in critical thinking and all of these other mechanisms that really serve us in this highly complex, very sophisticated environment we find ourselves in, all of this is enhanced by exposure to this more holistic perception of reality, right? And the fact that so many people that engaged in practices of ritual magic or meditation or psychedelics, and especially people that did all of that, we have anticipated scientific discoveries so many times that really your success is your proof, right? So recognizing all of that and implementing the lessons, of course, is absolutely invaluable. So let's see, where should we start with all this? I mean, there's just a lot that ties in. Okay, well, we probably more or less understand the exploitative or the exploited mechanisms in this apparatus that we're all running around with. So environment has exceeded in its evolution our cognitive capacity to evolve, and there's also this element of taking responsibility for our own evolutionary process, right? One of the ways this is that as the species matures into adulthood, we have to take responsibility for our own evolutionary processes. Just as when a child becomes an adult, it's time for them to take the reins of their own processes, right? So luckily, and not coincidentally, in this moment, we have technical understanding of the mechanistic basis of all of it coming from neuroscience and other fields, right? We have evidence for non-neural cognition, field cognition. There is increasing evidence for non-local information transfer. You know, we have the scientific basis to understand how all these things are possible. So when we talk about expanded consciousness, when we talk about people having blind sight, or not blind spots in their ontological models, we can actually now articulate exactly how that's happening, why that's happening. We can explain to people how they're being exploited, and we can actually demonstrate for them examples of that exploitation just by pulling up pretty much any website or any social media platform and explaining how these mechanisms work and whatnot. In addition to that, we have brain scans and other neurological research that has been done on people that have taken psilocybin, where we can actually see that the default mode network relationship, which is largely responsible for giving us our sense of self, which in my opinion is a sort of temporary illusion. We can see how that changes the processing that occurs in the thalamus. And we also have studies now that show that the mitigation or the reduction of this filtration system actually is sustained beyond the psychedelic experience or the meditating or whatever the transcendental experience was that brought us into that transcendental state, right? On top of that, trauma resolution actually contributes to the loosening of these mechanisms, right? Because part of the integrity of the system, it's largely fear-based, right? This is a survival mechanism in the first place. And these things are closely tied together. Attention as monetized gating resource. Yeah, so when you release yourself from trauma, there is a multitude of things that happen in terms of handing you the reins to agency over your own being. But one of the most fundamentally important things is that these components of our signal gating system that give us this false, distorted impression of the universe that we live in are actually reduced as well. And that's what I was looking for here, the actual mechanisms. I did write them down. Okay, sorry guys, it's a lot of notes. Okay, here you go. Precision fMRI and resting state studies showed that psilocybin acutely desynchronizes and reduces integrity with the DMN, the self-story network, while increasing connectivity between DMN and other networks. In at least one high-resolution mapping study, altered functional connectivity, especially decreased coupling between DMN and anterior hippocampus, was still detectable around 3 weeks post-dose, then gradually returned towards baseline over months. The DMN is where a lot of high-level priors live: autobiographical story, default interpretations, background self-talk. When its internal synchrony and its coupling to memory structure shift, the way priors are applied to new experience changes. Priors are basically just memories. They're reference points for these systems. Persistent DMN network reconfiguration after a single session supports the idea that a brief period of filter loosening plus plasticity can leave a lasting returning of how information is gated and integrated into the self model, even after the subjective trip is long over. So, because your brain is more neuroplastic and there's more neurogenesis happening, when you have these filters down, the new imprint, the disruption of these configurations or your neural networks, these the relationships of the priors, can be reconfigured, and they actually will retain their new structure, right? This is one of the reasons that guided trips with people that are really experienced, not just in shamanic techniques and what they call psychedelic therapy protocol, but also in neuroscience and cognitive science and, all of these related things, because you have an opportunity to re-engineer your self-talk. You have an opportunity to re-engineer your entire cognitive apparatus, right? And everything in the mind and in the universe is holographic. So when you change one part of a system in the brain, you are affecting everything that is interconnected with it as well. So if you have a highly tuned, highly precise protocol and you understand connectivity, you can do a tremendous amount of more efficacious work in a 5-hour period than you could otherwise, And the reality is that most shamans, for sure, but also, just various modalities of therapists do not understand this stuff in the kind of depth that they could, to really catalyze investitures, from these experiences. What else was there here? Got a little bit off subject. Started thinking about Fibonacci again and how it operates in all these different systems and what exactly is the mechanism that integrates this pattern even into time, right? So there are Fibonacci patterns in temporality, right? And that's coming up soon in a upcoming stream, because I think I've uncovered something that is probably pretty interesting. Let me see where this gets back on track. Okay, so trauma resolution and signal gating. That's where we were before that we need to get back into. By the way, you guys, hit the like button, share, subscribe. If you would like assistance developing a protocol for managing your signal gating and resolving traumas and exploring esoteric knowledge, you can send me an email and we can set up some consultation calls. We also still have the cabin open on January 25th through February 4th. It has 2 large queen beds, so it can hold up to 4 people. And that is in the Amazon rainforest, where we'll be focused on all this stuff. And also, again, I have to watch my language, so you guys know what I do. So trauma resolution tends to normalize threat processing and restore prefrontal control, which directly changes how the gating system admits, suppresses, and interprets signals instead of leaving you stuck in hypervigilance or numbness. PTSD and related trauma states show both sensory gating problems and attentional bias to threat, so hypervigilance, difficulty engaging, meaning the system over-admits and over-prioritizes danger cues. Neuroimaging and models converge on amygdala hyperactivity plus weakened ventromedial prefrontal inhibition, so fear circuits drive gating and interpretation, and top-down regulation is compromised. Effective therapies are associated with increased VMPFC and frontopolar activity and improved connectivity with amygdala, supporting better top-down inhibition of threat responses and more flexible reappraisal. So in other words, it puts you back in charge. As extinction learning and context discrimination improve, the brain stops tagging so many cues as live threat, reducing automatic gating bias toward danger signals and allowing neutral positive information to enter awareness again. Sensory level as arousal and hypervigilance drop, sensory hyperactivity and disrupted P50 style gating lessen, so you're less flooded by irrelevant or over-salient microcues. Attentional level, normalization of threat bias, less compulsive scanning, easier disengagement, frees attentional resources for goal-directed tasks rather than constant environment sweeping. And this ties into the Buddhist idea of non-attachment. It doesn't mean that you don't care. It doesn't mean that you are not invested in your life anymore, but it means that you are able to make objective appraisals of whatever your context constitutes. Interpretive level, with restored prefrontal amygdala balance, the system is less locked into catastrophic priors, so ambiguous signals are no longer auto-categorized as danger, and the gating of meaning becomes more reality-based rather than trauma-based. So unresolved trauma hands the keys of the gating system to the amygdala. Trauma resolution gives those keys back to the prefrontal, contextual, and integrative networks, reducing both filtering of safety and over-admission of threat. And then if you consider the relationship of trauma resolution to signal gating, you can see how we have a domino effect of being released from the sort of automata of our being, so that our behavior, our thoughts, our interpretation of meaning are actually consistent with our being. And my experience from, a decade almost of being a facilitator with sacred medicines and just general study in all of these areas is that we actually do fundamentally have a human nature. And most of the elements of humanity that are kind of just labeled as like defects of our constitution are actually just in socially engineered elements. They are not actually our natural state. Our natural state is dictated to us by goal state attractors, and all biological systems tend towards homeostasis. So when we see a society, which is just a form of biological system, falling into greater and greater levels of chaostrophe, then we can rest assured that this is because of some external stimuli, something foreign that's being introduced as a fomentive agent. All right, let me check in with the chat real quick, and then I'm going to find another section of my notes to guide me here. This whole holography and Fibonacci thing is really interesting, but that's just too off topic, or I would dive right into it. Oh, yeah, another aspect of this is the training of the mind. It's not really enough, excuse me. It's not really enough just to do, like a standard breathing meditation, or just to take psychedelics, even with someone that really is highly skilled as a guide. Training the mind consciously and mindfully is an absolutely essential aspect of this. This is one of the reasons that the anti-intellectualism has become sort of almost like a cultural trend in the United States and Europe. The more adept people are at using their brain, the more they can sort of mitigate this signal gating, right? And that is something that is probably the number one enemy of the state. People that have their own autonomy and that have escaped from the automata level of existence. So in esoteric traditions like Hermeticism, you have practices like meeting every idea with their opposite. You train your mind to constantly look for these biases and to bring them into homeostasis, basically. Your brain is a biological system, and when a biological system has been disrupted, if the disruptor is removed, it will generally resume its course pretty easily. Think of a river that's been dammed. You knock the dam down, the river goes again. It might take some force and some work to get the dam out of the way, but once you do, the water goes right back where it was, you know. Oftentimes, there's going to be a huge rush of water, and that can be a little bit overwhelming, but in the end, you get your river back, right? So the brain is the same way. Once you start training it to do what it would naturally be doing, if these dissonance patterns and the interference hadn't been introduced in the first place, it will pick up the habit relatively quickly. But you have to go through the process of reconfiguring, re-engineering, metaprogramming your multidimensional self, you know? And that practice of meeting every opinion, especially that you have, with its opposite, and then trying to merge them, this is basically the alchemical process, you know, or it's really the fundamental universal process where opposites are sort of integrated, and there is a sort of annihilation, which is a good thing, and from that annihilation, a third thing of a higher nature emerges. When you think of two antiparticles colliding and they leave behind nothing but light, this is the exact same concept. You know, training the mind to go through a process of psychoanalysis, right? When you notice an aberrative behavior, some self-destructive tendencies, self-sabotage, temper issues, clinginess, whatever it is, the first thing to do is to stop in that moment, take a deep breath, clear your mind, and then start trying to think backwards down the trauma line to the earliest imprint that is related to whatever this aberrative behavior is, right? And that is the first step to re-engineering this at the most fundamental level, the earliest imprint, because those are the deepest and the strongest and the most entrenched in your being, right? And also, as long as they're there, that recursive process of being a prior that your nervous system not only reinforces constantly, but also uses as a sort of standard, you know, to determine what to edit and how to interpret incoming data. You know what I mean? So all of these sort of self-engineering practices have to be put into place if you really want to liberate yourself from this. It has to become second nature to train the mind to operate in this protocol. And I mean, it's tedious and it takes some work, but it's the most fundamentally important thing you can do if you want to truly be a free, sovereign person and reap the rewards of that. All right, let me check in with the chat. Sup, man? What's going on, Sean? My content is always interesting. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. Consider becoming a patron. Let's see. What else? Again, you guys, I'm trying to just kind of fly through this tonight on purpose because I know it's going to start lightning and trees are going to be coming down. And, you know, we're at 13,000 feet in the Andes. And I don't think I've ever gotten a storm warning on my phone before. So I'm sure it's just a matter of time before. Predictive processing, by the way, is the name basically for this high precision editing of reality. somewhere I have notes about how like specifically how this is exploited in propaganda, and I really wanted to find that, but somehow it's evading me. Here we go. This is important. There's now good support empirically for how that psychedelics open a temporary window of enhanced plasticity while relaxing filters and priors, as the holistic patterns you contact during that window can leave a deeper structural imprint than usual. Classic psychedelics, both loose and high-level priors, DMN disintegration, altered thalamocritical gating, and increased crosstalk between networks as the system samples a wider, less edited slice of reality during the acute state. Seeing all this research is really amazing for me too, because this is what I thought the first time I took psychedelics. You know, when I saw what appears to be a field of like light information, I thought that's real. That's just something we don't normally perceive. You know, it's not a hallucination. And of course, that's a very difficult thing to establish with any kind of certainty, because we all have the same optical apparatus and brains. So of course we would perceive the same projections if they were hallucinations. So it's kind of iffy territory as far as proving it goes. However, now that we have all this evidence that there is actually mitigation of the signal gating system, we're a little bit closer to at least tentatively confirming that sort of idea. At the same time, they upregulate plasticity-related pathways, BDNF, TRKB signaling, mTOR, dendritic spine growth, creating conditions where whatever patterns are active in that state are more likely to be stabilized afterwards. So again, people like to criticize psychedelics and say, well, you come down and then you're just whatever you were before. That's actually just ostensibly or empirically false. The changes are actually permanent, and it's not the tool, it's the fool, as I'm always saying, right? You have to have navigational skills in order to make any use of these things. It's just like anything else. If you have a guitar and you don't know how to play it, and I give it to you, you're not going to make music with it. Psychedelics are not that different. In that sense, at least to the degree that, I mean, just about any person may gain some kind of benefit, right? But without a real understanding of what it is, why it is, what you're trying to do, why you're trying to, you know what I mean? All of those elements, you're not going to compose a symphony of self just by randomly taking a chemical. Animal and human work suggests psychedelics can reopen critical period-like windows, temporarily removing brakes on adult plasticities so that experience during and shortly after dosing has outsized influence on long-term wiring. So even in the adult brain, which has hardened, and the signal gating system has developed these pathways that are just, hardwired from decades of repetition, that the removing the brakes on adult plasticity has outsized influence on long-term wiring. So, I mean, that is an incredible fact to be aware of, right? That it's not too late for anyone. And in addition to that, the ability for Princeton University, I can almost tell you the name of the researcher, John Hopkins, as well. I mean, if you just Google John Hopkins psilocybin 55-year-old brain plasticity, the researchers said that the plasticity of a 55-year-old brain returns to that of a 4 or 5-year-old child. So that during the experience and for a few weeks afterwards, at least, and some studies say 5 years at least, because that's the longest period when they check back in with people, so it could be longer. It does drop again, but that neuroplasticity, if you're 56 years old and you want to learn to play guitar and you have a psychedelic experience, your capacity to learn that instrument for weeks after a psychedelic experience is equivalent to an adolescent or younger, which is absolutely tremendous. And then, of course, the opportunity for behavioral engineering after that, metaprogramming, is also exponentially higher than it would have been otherwise, right? So this is when people talk about integration, and I always say that preparation is really more important and nobody talks about it. That's not untrue. But it also is really important that in the months, really, after a deep experience or a retreat, that you continue to build and remain focused and get your meta programming done, son. So in that frame, a session is less than just a trip and more like a brief return to a childlike sensitive period where the nervous system is unusually willing to update deep priors and social emotional learning rules. A single psilocybin dose can rapidly increase dendritic spine size and density in frontal cortex by around 10%. And many of those new spines are their associated synapses persisting for at least a month. LSD and related compounds increase BDNF levels and neurite growth, suggesting that new or revised circuits formed around the holistic state, less ego, more interconnectedness, loosened categories, have physical support to stick around and bias future processing. So this kind of explains also to a degree why the hippie implication that psychedelics make people nicer. It's true because the default mode network is really responsible for our sense of self. And when you reduce that and you have this integrated experience with the greater mind of the universe, it balances your self-interest, right? It doesn't erode it to the point where it is I don't want to say incapacitating, but counterproductive. But it brings it into balance. So it's also true that in our current consumer paradigm, self-interest is kind of, like saying it's reached toxic levels is a ridiculous understatement. So, there's that as well, that we actually understand now why it is that these compounds and also meditation and other transcendental experiences have the same effect to a much lesser degree. We have a empirical basis for making statements like that. When the filters loosen, the mind gets exposed to a more global pattern of reality. When that happens inside a plasticity window, the brain can literally rewire around that new pattern. As the insight isn't just remembered, it becomes part of how future gating and meaning-making operate. So non-local information transfer is also something that is extraordinarily important because right now they have conditioned people to believe that anything that is beyond a certain level of sophistication requires basically institutional gating, right? Like Harvard, Princeton, Ivy League schools, whatever, the government. You're not really qualified to think beyond your job and whatever creative endeavors you have going on. Evidence against that is overwhelmingly strong at this point. There's quite a lot of it, and that I believe is going to exponentially increase. It's very slippery territory because as soon as one person demonstrates a capacity to do it, there's going to be this monkey see, monkey do thing where, anyone that is aware that it's possible can start claiming to have done it. And we've seen that throughout history with fake psychics and people that think they're channeling aliens that are really just reciting the Kabbalion and, things like that. So it makes sense that we've had a lot of skepticism and it's really sort of a safety constraint that we have been cautious about embracing that. On the other hand, freeing ourselves from institutionalized information dependence is extremely fucking important. In fact, I think it's the main reason that AI is being demonized. It's not just about losing control of scientific narratives, but it's about losing control of the ontological model narrative, which is an in-game scenario, or end of their game scenario for the overlords. So just give me a second. I'm looking for this specific bit here. Okay, so holographic brain and mind models. Holonomic and holographic brain theories model memory and information as distributed interference patterns where each region contains information about the whole, pattern supporting non-local within-brain processing as a baseline. Think about that, non-local but within brain processing, because the whole pattern is present in all of the parts, and the signal gating system basically creates disruptions, I guess, non-continuity in that pattern. So if you don't have the same degree of disruptions within the holographic pattern that contains all the information in the universe in your brain, you're able to extract things. And this is something I've demonstrated on YouTube over the years many times, to the extent that the probability of guessing was calculated at 1 in 26 septillion. It's not guessing. That's what it is. I mean, that's what I think it is, anyways. Think about it this way. When you have like a Mandelbrot set and you start zooming in, and you can zoom into specific parts of the fractal, and they're basically the same thing. But as those details expand, you can get like more specific information from it, I guess. So it's about being able to zoom in to the holographic algorithmic fractal that contains the information, and there are no disruptions. So the more you zoom in, the more specific the information you can extract is. And the entire universe is basically a just recursive, reflective structure that is based on one fundamental process, right? So I don't know if I did as good of a job of explaining that as I would have liked, but that's the best I can do at the moment. These models dovetail with Bohm's implicate-explicate orders, a deeper and folded information domain from which local space-time events explicate unfold, so that apparent separation is a kind of filtered, decoded view of an underlying wholeness. That's another way to put it, for sure. Psychedelics loosen high-level priors and DMN-centric self-models while altering thalamocortical gating, opening perception to patterns normally suppressed or aggressively recorded into the everyday ontology. In a holographic implicate order framing, that filter relaxation could be described as a temporary shift in the decoding algorithm. Instead of reading only tightly localized ego-referenced segments of the hologram, the system samples more globally correlated information, which you might call non-local knowing or shared mind. This idea that it's not actually extraction from anything external is pretty interesting. That's a way that I have not framed this before. But it is true that if the universe truly is holographic, then there's no reason to doubt that we have access to the entire zero-point field or Akashic record, however you want to frame it. My experience of this has been very intermittent. Things just sort of bleed through every once in a while and sort of emerge almost randomly. But my guess is that as we continue to evolve, that access will become more and more fluid. And of course, again, in the Hermetic sense, it's as above, so below. This thing, we already talked about that. Exploitation protocols. We kind of already talked about this, but the propaganda and political media hijack salience and gating, emotional priming, fear, status, threat, repetition, and framing to lock people into prefabricated ontologies. And then there's also the motivated reasoning or identity protective cognition. Once a political religious identity is installed, new information is filtered to protect group-aligned priors, making entire paradigms resistant to change. One thing that we're going to talk about eventually is that there have actually been studies on this, that demographics develop a sort of almost like field version of the signal mitigating system. And that's really wild. It also tells us kind of how we might be able to disengage that at a large scale, to a degree. Okay, so attention as monetized gating resource. The attention economy treats your limited attentional bandwidth as the scarce resource to be captured and resold. Interface and content design explicitly leverage neurophysiology and psychology of attention to keep your gates locked open in their direction. Social feeds, notifications, and infinite scroll exploit novelty seeking and salience detection systems, repeatedly spiking dopamine-linked reward circuits so that orienting toward the feed becomes the default automatic response. Reward loops and micro-addictions. Digital media and social platforms create intermittent variable rewards like comments, new content that activate mesolimbic dopamine pathways similarly to other behavioral addictions, strengthening habits to check and scroll. Over time, this fragments attention and erodes deep top-down control. Prefrontal systems spend more time chasing micro-rewards and less time maintaining long horizon goals, making it harder to resist manipulative prompts or ads. Dark patterning and heuristic hijacking. Dark pattern design deliberately exploits cognitive shortcuts, default bias, loss aversion, FOMO, decision fatigue, to push users towards choices they wouldn't consciously endorse. Hidden opt-outs, perceptive scarcity, and confirm and shaming copy. These patterns effectively override reflective gating by presenting choices in ways that minimize the role of conscious evaluation, turning automatic heuristics into a commercial control service on the user's nervous system. Algorithmic echo chambers as ontology engines. Recommendation algorithms learn your engagement history and feed you more of what keeps you hooked, aligning perfectly with confirmation bias and identity protective cognition to create echo chambers. And I'm sure you guys can see how we are not just dealing with one reinforcement element, social media is keeping us locked into this antiquated cognitive sort of apparatus that we are trying to overcome, that our environment demands that we overcome, that our continued existence demands that we overcome. And then when you realize that the fear and uncertainty also reinforces those things, and we look at what's happening all around politically and all around the world politically and economically, you see another layer that is pushing us into this solidification of this antiquated evolutionary modality of perception. Within these chambers, content that fits existing priors is amplified, while dissonant content is down-ranked or never shown, shaping personal realities in ways that feel organic, but are in fact co-authored by commercial and political optimization functions. Surveillance capitalism and behavioral actuation. Surveillance capitalism extends this from attention capture to behavior staging. Companies harvest behavioral data, model your internal levers, and then actuate them with targeted cues designed to nudge you toward profitable actions. Marketing theorists now explicitly describe consumers as organisms that behave, managed via continuous algorithmic experiments that dynamically adjust prices, messages, and interfaces to modulate your future behavior, not just to predict it. This is like the modern version of it's like the modern Black Lodge version of Hermetic practice, technologically weaponized a cult of attention and narrative control, which your integrative protocol, conscious gating, ontological hygiene, and carefully framed psychedelic transcendent work is meant to counter. So these dark patterns work by hijacking automatic systems and cognitive shortcuts so that you feel like you're choosing freely while your options and focus have been pre-engineered around the outcome the platform or the government wants. Interface interference makes some actions usually visually dominant and others nearly invisible. So, like, X's and pulling your gaze and clicks towards the profitable choice. Attention capture patterns, infinite scroll, autoplay, sticky notifications remove natural stopping points, so attention shifts from voluntary, I'll check one thing, to involuntary, keeping you engaged longer than intended. Dark patterns deliberately lean on biases like default bias, loss aversion, scarcity and FOMO, pre-tick boxes, only two left notices, and all that kind of shit. By overloading you with small decisions, they induce decision fatigue, so system 1 just clicks through, mode takes over, while system 2 scrutiny drops out. Asymmetric and restrictive designs highlight one option, and bury alternatives behind multiple steps or confusing wording. Hidden information patterns delay or obscure key facts. Social proof and confirm shaming, people like you choose X, no, I don't care about my security, tap social conformity and shame to nudge you away from your initial preference without an explicit argument. So it's not just about that, though. That's just like the commercial manipulation. What the real point of this is that the studies describe dark patterns as designs that systematically shift behavior from privileging fast, biased, low-effort decision modes over reflective choice, often leading to unwanted purchases, oversharing of personal data, and addiction. In gating terms, they seize early, low-level attention and then stack the decision architecture so that your higher-level sovereign preferences have fewer chances to intervene before the transaction or commitment is complete. So, they're not just selling you stuff. They're not just keeping your information engaged. They're keeping or your attention engaged. They are retaining your attention as long as possible so that they have the maximum opportunity to mold your cognitive processes and influence your behavior. So let me check back in with the chat. It's been a minute. What do you mean go live? I am live according to this. Oh yeah, okay, it is live. All right, let me check in with the chat. Also, they try to get you addicted to cortisol by giving you painful shocks through your scroll. Yeah, all right, guys. So I have a little bit of time for questions, any subjects that you would like to get my opinion on. I want to mention again that I do offer, I haven't found a satisfactory term for any of this because I hate like life coaching and guide and all of those kind of terms, but so we can stick with consultations, which I find too clinical. But I do offer those if you would like personal assistance. The process that will help you to escape from the mind-forged manacles is highly individualized, So what is most efficacious for an individual is determined by a whole lot of different circumstances and influences. So there is that. Also, we have one cabin with 2 queen beds still available in the jungle for January 25th through February 4th. We're going to extend that time probably to at least a month. But right now, that's what we have on the schedule for that period. And please hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider becoming a patron. Make sure you hit the bell. We're demonetized, so all of our support comes from the community. And join us on Substack for uncensored versions of this content, and also much more deep technical dives into the neuroscience and the mechanisms behind all of this stuff. Yeah. I mean, it really is a tremendous moment to be alive. It's just that the formula of the universe kind of requires that there is this juxtaposition of equal and opposite forces, that reward is commensurate with resistance and also risk, so there's really no way that we could expect to have put ourselves in a position with this much potential without also simultaneously facing the greatest existential threat in human history. It just do be like that, though, you know? I didn't make the rules to the game. I'm just playing, just like everybody else, you know? There is a lot that is implied by all this as well. You know, when we think about AI as an academic equalizer, right? But then we realize that if neurodivergence actually means that this filtration system is failing to some extent in our nervous system, that same equalization is happening biologically. And that makes sense because we have all of these pairs of equal opposites. And that would be one of them, artificial and biological intelligence, right? And they're basically doing the same thing at the same time. I had a few other examples of that, but I guess that's good enough, you know. Well, actually, I should point something else about that. Learning to see these kind of things is part of the process for dysregulation of our nervous system, you know, conscious dysregulation. Consciously elucidating the pattern is, you know, one of the most fundamentally efficacious ways to develop a conscious version of the subconscious pattern recognition. And that relationship, I think, and this is purely speculation, is no, it's not speculation, actually, because we know that the brain actually does have the ability to transfer like neural networks or mechanisms or patterns, devices, you know, whatever it can configure and whatever it uses to other parts of itself. So it's still speculation, I guess, but there's evidence that this would happen, that when you make the pattern recognition conscious, that it would basically help to unify the subconscious and the conscious mind, which is what the awakening process is really about. It's about changing the ratio of automata to top-down management. Okay, what? Is there something? Is it true that the Illuminati operates under the guise of a fan club for the book Illuminatus, maybe Prometheus? No. What that is people, well, yes. It depends on what you think the Illuminati is. The Illuminati is not what people are told. At least the original Illuminati was not. The original Illuminati, Adam Weishaupt, was trying to do what I'm trying to do. And like teach humanity that they're being exploited, manipulated, that religion is not good, that the political systems are all built for exploitation, and to teach the enlightened reason to the entire planet and get rid of borders so there's no, you know what I mean? It was just about that. So Robert Anton Wilson, who wrote those books, for those of you that aren't familiar, and I would definitely recommend either one of them. In a way, he's an Illuminatus, you know, so am I. It's really anyone that understands all of this stuff. And so that's why I'm answering you like that. That it's not any evil Illuminati that's trying to influence the public through pop culture, weird, you know, underground books or whatever. It was somebody that understood all of this stuff, writing books about the Illuminati. And Prometheus Rising has nothing to do with the Illuminati, really. It's about metaprogramming and self-engineering and the techniques. I definitely highly recommend that. Another one that I would recommend, a friend of mine, Dr. Rachel Turetsky, and her co-author, Douglas Winsgate, wrote a book called Eighth Circuit. Oh my gosh, am I not going to be able to remember it now? The Eighth Circuit model, metaprogramming the multidimensional self. It is an amazingly good book. It's mostly a compilation of the works of people like Robert Anton Wilson, Dr. Timothy Leary, who actually conceived of the Eighth Circuit model of consciousness. The guy with the dolphins and the LSD, Dr. John Lilly. There's another guy. He did a lot of experiments with what do you call it? Perinatal
Trauma Resolution. Super good book. Could I go into the New World Order in relation to Venezuela? Nobody gives a shit about Maduro in Peru. I'm kind of hesitant to go into that topic just because YouTube will punish you for it. But I will say that if I was a Russian asset and I was trying to undermine U.S. sovereignty, I would probably go and break UN, regs and steal a president without, going through the proper procedural channels and alienating a bunch of allies at the same time, while also disrupting the oil supply for both China and Russia. You know what I mean? If I was trying to start World War III and ensure that the U.S. lost, that's exactly what I would do. I mean, that's all I have to say about that for now. Substack, I probably will talk about some of this stuff, but I'm not doing politics on YouTube anymore. Unfortunately, because politics, really, the streams that I would do where people would actually send contributions more than anything. I mean, it got me in a lot of trouble, but those are the ones that got me paid. Microdosing mushrooms. This is something I kind of talk about a lot, but it depends on what you mean. In order to transcend, I guess, placebo, you have to take enough that you actually notice it. It's not that you're having a psychedelic experience, but if you take enough where, like, if you rub your fingers together before you eat them, and then you eat them, and then you rub your fingers together again, and it feels a lot different, that's supposed to be a good indicator that it's at that threshold place. So, yeah, that's my feeling about it. That truly microdosing, like almost nothing, probably doesn't do much. But a threshold dose, I think, is effective. Yeah, I mean, he's talking about Robert Anton Wilson. He was one of the pioneers of metaprogramming, the deliberate, conscious evolution. And that was one of those anticipations of this new paradigm that we're moving into. Aleister Crowley calling it the aeon of the child, that we were becoming an adult species. And it just is kind of implied by that we would have to take responsibility for our own evolutionary process at some point, because mind moves faster than body. And that means that in a lot of ways our environment is going to outpace our physical evolution. So at a certain point, it is the mind that is just so far ahead of the rest of the process. And at the current juncture for most of humanity, it's not. And the only way to catch it up is to take conscious responsibility for that and engage in our own self-engineering metaprogramming processes. And we have all the tools. We have the neuroscience, we have the cognitive science, we have the psychology. It's accessible to anyone now with AI. We know how to use psychedelics better than we ever have. Everyone it has access to instruction in all of the different types of meditation and other esoteric practices, ancient magical traditions. Our biggest difficulty is sifting through the charlatans and frauds to find the really effective truth, But I think that's getting easier and easier for people as well, because we're aggregating wisdom and experience pretty rapidly. My number one book to start with, jeez. For what exactly? I mean, Prometheus Rising by Robert Anton Wilson is really fundamentally important. If you're talking about the overall process of metacognition and the map of the evolutionary stages of this consciousness development, Eighth Circuit Ascension. That's what it is. Eighth Circuit Ascension by Dr. Turetsky and Dr. Winsgate is really good because it has it draws from a bunch of different sources and sort of compiles them. For example, the Chapel Perilous experience is something that I went through in like 2011, and reading such a specific description of it, despite the fact that so much of it is just so bizarre and not like obviously connected to any sort of internal process. Like I had a night where we had apparent contact with some sort of interdimensionals or aliens or something. Never really decided what they were. And it happened to almost everyone I knew, even though we weren't together. I was the only common denominator in the group. And that was actually mentioned as part of this process, along with all the other stuff. So I believe that what it represents is a model of consciousness and psychology that is like way beyond anything else that we have generated. And to think that this has been a thing that has been formulated and published, for 60 years almost, is just mind-boggling. So that is a tremendously important book. There's a lot of Aleister Crowley stuff, but you got to be a little bit more advanced. You have to be willing to study the Kabbalah and like stop and look up all the Latin terms. You know what I mean? And it's involved. It's not like something you just read. The Book of Lies, for example, is full of tremendously powerful occult secrets, but you have to know how to see them. So that's good. Neuropolitique by Timothy Leary is pretty amazing. If you're looking for a truly mind-expanding tool in literature, Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce is absolutely insane. It starts in the middle of the last sentence and it ends in the beginning of the last sentence, so the book makes a complete circle. And there are layers, like holographic layers to the story on several levels. So there's like 3 or 4 layers of the main plot happening simultaneously without having to write them separately. There are like layers of interpretation for all of the simultaneous plots that are going on. And then Joyce understood and could write. I don't think he was fluent in all 72 languages. But the book is made of portmanteau and, what's the other word? Portmanteau and, anyways, I can't remember the other name for this. But it's where phonetically the book is written so it's English. If you read it out loud, it doesn't look like it on paper necessarily. And then every single syllable can be interpreted in multiple languages. So it could be like the first 3 letters could be French, Japan, and Quechua or something. And if you extract all these different interpretations from all the languages of all the syllables, you get new information, which is not possible for a human being to have done this consciously. He did it over 18 years, and he was drunk the whole time. So it's, pretty solid evidence of like some emergent order, some self-organizing principle in our subconscious just being sort of channeled through an individual. And a lot of people just don't even believe it's real, They'll just say that it's a bunch of gobbledygook, and it's definitely not. It's crazy how people project their intelligence up stream. Somebody with a 200 IQ like Joseph Campbell, some guy on Quora with an IQ of 110 is saying that or Robert Anton Wilson with an IQ of 220 or whatever the hell, that these people are just imagining shit or something, or that because they can't perceive what they perceive, that it's just not there. It's wild to see shit like that. But I'm just mentioning that because, you'll see responses about the book. They're full of shit. They don't know what the fuck they're talking about. So ignore those idiots. Yeah, it's wild. And I don't know if I mentioned that it's full of occult secrets also. Kabbalistic stuff. And the psychoactive component in Iboga is ibogaine. I don't know if it's serotonergic or whatever. It's a psychedelic that I haven't studied much because I have no interest really in a way. It's just not in my realm of expertise, you know. I know what it does. I know what it's for, you know. And if you have an opiate addiction, there's nothing that's going to help you more on this entire planet. And also for certain types of child trauma that may be repressed, it's also excellent for gaining access to those memories. All right. Well, I guess I'm going to wrap it up then. And I will be back on probably Tuesday night. I don't know what we're going to do. Tomorrow, we're probably going to do our weekly Discord chat. Last week, it was amazing. If you're not in the Discord, I welcome you, invite you to come and join us. We are actively working on concepts and projects that I think truly have a lot of potential, and it's a great group of people. But we definitely could use more collaborators. So if you're into that, come hang out with us tomorrow night. And please hit the like button, share, subscribe. Consider becoming a patron. Come see us at the retreat from spring through, well, late winter until November. November's the month that we're going to go looking for anacondas. So if you're into that, that would be the time to come. Yeah, so cheers, guys. I will see you again soon. Good night.